any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our guest instructor tonight, Professor Jim Brennan, who teaches in the management department. Jim's topic tonight is emotional intelligence under pressure. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Brennan.
Thank you, Steve, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight, taking the time, and thank you for your interest in the Lehigh MBA. As Steve said, I teach in the management department, both undergraduate and graduate, and my area of interest, I won't say expertise, but my area of interest is the human asset. And so I teach the human behavior, organizational behavior. In one MBA, I also teach org behavior, and then I teach HR and employees. I do teach the senior capstone class, so I'm interested in strategy too. I really am interested in how we use our mind to be really smart. It's not just being calm, having a nice day. I like to win. One of the things that I was involved in for 12 years, from the years 2005 and through 2017, I was the sports psychology consultant for Villanova basketball. So I was pretty immersed in that program, and it was my laboratory, quite frankly. It was where the pressure was already baked in, just as it is in so many of the areas that you are working in now, just as it is in society right now and what we're all going through. The pressure, we don't have to hypothesize about that, right? So anyway, one of the things that I do in class, in particular with a master's level class, is I really want to bring together all of the wisdom and experience that the students bring, because I'm supposed to help you animate the content that we're teaching so that you connect it to what you're trying to do and to do better, and then you go see if it works, right? So what I'd like to do in this session that we have now is we're not going to we can't get into groups physically, but we'll have 2 breakout sessions, one early on and one about midway through, groups of 4, just randomly chosen groups of 4. And I'll pose a question that I'd like you to discuss with each other for 7 or 8 minutes, and then come back to the plenary session. And then I want to know what you know and but also what you are trying to connect this information to, because it's really important for me that you go away with some really good takeaways, and then I'll feel like this was really worth your time. In the classroom, the attitude that I think most professors have, in particular at the master's level, is we just want to be as smart as we all are together. We don't really. I don't try to be the smartest person in the classroom. I don't think I could get away with it. But at the end of the class, I like the idea of walking away feeling smarter because of what happened in that classroom. And so it's such a privilege to have people who are really experienced, already educated, highly motivated, real drivers. So that's what I'm looking for tonight. I think most of you received from Blair the printout that I sent out. It's the outline that I'm going to be working off of tonight, but I'll just go quickly through the preamble. This is about emotional intelligence under pressure, and it's how is it possible for those who work under lots of pressure to maintain the benefits of a calm and highly discerning mind. Like, we want to really be able to pick things apart under the pressure, and keep enough calmness, keep a platform of tranquility where we are thriving under the pressure, not just surviving the pressure. How do we regain our mental equilibrium once we become upset and fall under the reactive spell of anger, frustration, fear, discouragement, or any other high anxiety? And that's how you know you're under pressure, right? Because it's not smooth sailing. There's always going to be that point where it's starting to get the better of you. As we learn to choose tranquility, that's what I really want you to walk away with tonight, is more idea of what the levers are for you to intentionally choose tranquility at the moments where you can sense it's getting away from you. But tranquility in the mind isn't always just reflection, right? Tranquility in the mind can be something that's a real advantage. It's very possible. It's accommodative of really high-paced things as well. Because when that happens, we enhance our ability to see clearly, to think intelligently, and choose our responses more freely and wisely. We're usually not that wise when we feel like we have our back to the wall. We're not that wise when we're in fight or flight. So that's what we're trying to avoid. I'm going to suggest ways for you in those situations to create what I call the psychological working space for you to do all of these things, to be free and wise and discerning. The last thing is we sign up for the pressure. All of you and me as well. We're proud of the things that we have achieved when the pressure is really on. High achievers they know that special things don't happen except on the edge of the comfort zone. Nothing special. If we retreat from the edge of the comfort zone, we're not really working on growth and developing our talent. And we're probably not taking a big enough risk or going for a big enough reward. So one of the reasons why we might be reluctant to be out on the edge of the comfort zone too often is we don't sign up to fail either. We want to win, but we certainly don't want to lose. There are penalties for losing. And maybe in certain areas of our lives, we got our butts kicked when we were on the edge of the comfort zone. And so we are not that anxious to go back there again. And so what I've done here in this is try to separate, because stress is, in some ways you could say stress is good at certain doses. Pressure, we know the mind is designed for us to do well under pressure. It's designed for us to grow under pressure. So pressure in itself is not a negative. And so what I've done is I've split it apart just in a semantic way to say there's pressure and then there's stress. And stress would be when our own negative internal reactions to the pressure, then they start to really work against us. Okay, so pressure is fine. Maybe we have to raise our game to meet the urgency or the complexity of the pressure. A little bit of fear of losing, like a little bit of fear of failure. But at some point, we know that what's going on internally and our reaction to this, we're being overwhelmed, and we are starting to work against our best interest, and we are starting to go to less than optimal responses. Okay, so this is the first question for your first breakout session. So think about what I'm describing as pressure. Like, okay, we're going to use that to mean pressure is something. Stress is something that we want to catch early, and we want to mitigate it, turn it around, convert it to this clarity and tranquility and high functioning. So my question is, can you identify situations or maybe your own reactions when you know that you're going from pressure to stress, when it's starting to spiral downward? So I'll ask this again. So identify situations, talk this over with each other, where are situations, or maybe just your own internal reactions, when you know you're going from pressure to stress. And then we'll take those situations or reactions and we'll work through those. Fair enough? Any questions? Back? All right, great. Welcome back. Who would like to start? How do you know when things are starting to go the wrong way in terms of pressure now is becoming stress working against you?
I'll take a shot at it.
Okay, John.
Well, our group, we had some similarities. I think all of us, it's a feeling that comes up when you get to that point, but it's displayed different ways. One member of the group said he starts typing emails to try to handle it. For me, it's feeling of frustration and starting to take tasks back things that I want to do. Another one said they start acting or looking at it, trying to put logic behind everything that's happening and say, okay, let me take a logical look at what's going on. And another one was saying it's just a matter of coordination between management and the employees. When that's not there, trying to build that coordination back. So initial feelings of frustration or maybe losing a little control, and then the demonstration and the actions that we're taking tells us that maybe we're in a point of beyond pressure. Now we're feeling the stress.
Okay. I like those examples because they're both internal and external. Oh, good. Thank you, John. Others? We'll circle back and comment on those as well. But other examples?
So I can go, I guess, if Sophia is okay.
Sure.
Okay. So I had a little bit of a remark first. I think pressure is a state of a feeling and stress is the outcome, but stress doesn't have to be negative, even though it's associated as a negative thing. I think stress in the right amount actually motivates you to do better and try to achieve more. When it grows and it's no longer under control, that's where you get the feeling, tying to John and what he said, of being overwhelmed or anything that is negative that either prevents you from being able to do the work or makes you go all workaholic and try to finish that work. So for me, I actually work very well under a lot of, not a lot of stress, but with a lot of work and amounts. I think it actually drives me to, I become more detail oriented. I notice things more. I'm much more efficient. I get more done as opposed to a smaller workload where it gets me bored, again, going and tying to the feeling. And I can just do it very in depth, right? So more thoroughly than I would have if I had a bigger load of it, but the spectrum would be completely different. So there are many situations of, when you feel it, but I guess it really, what Sophia and I agreed on, it depends on the person. I think for some people it's a great motivator, and I think for others it just shuts them down. Same with the flight or fight mechanism. So that is it. When the pressure or the stress become too much, then I would usually wake up at night and go to the computer and see what I can get done. That's it.
Sure sign.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you. You're so right that there is no hard boundary. What I'm trying to describe is a great many parts subjective, because that's what we're feeling. Sometimes it's objective because it's what other people are seeing us when seeing in our reactions or in the results we're getting. So, but that's what we're talking about, is when we know, or when the results are starting to tell us that we are losing our ability to operate at the top of our potential when it matters most. Good, thank you. Others?
So in our group, a lot of the responses were more about the pressure of getting things done in a certain time period, whether it be a single project that you have a deadline on and you're waiting on other people, or that you've got, multiple things that have to get done and you're trying to prioritize what you're going to work on now because everything is important. Or sometimes it's just when, you start your day at work and you think, these are the things I'm going to get done today. And then other things come up that take priority, and you get to the end of the day and realize you don't feel like you've accomplished anything. But one of the other ones that I had mentioned where I sort of, identify that situation is when I'm talking to someone and I find myself turning off my active listening, because as they're talking, I want to start thinking about my answer. And I have to try and catch myself and think, okay, I need to focus on what they're saying completely before I start coming up with solutions, because number one, you can miss a lot of detail if you're not actively listening, but by the time they finish what they're saying, your response may completely change. So that's one of the things that I really try to try to keep in the back of my head when I feel myself, doing that internal thought. I think, okay, I have to stop doing that, focus on what they're saying.
Okay, good. And that back of your head, I'm really interested in, that there's an awareness there that you're watching what you're thinking and how you're reacting to, and that's what we want to highlight, that because operating at two levels of consciousness simultaneously is the key. It truly is. And even if we know, like I'm working at a certain rhythm, so I've got this internal clock, and then somebody's I'm interacting with is slowing down my rhythm, then it might be something I want to hear, but if I'm not conscious of that, then I will start to fall into that pattern of, I just need to cut this short, or I need to think about what I'm going to say next. I'm not really listening anymore. Very good. Others? Thank you.
Jim, along with that is the internal worry that that's happening. So like, as you said, the awareness where one item or one situation or one project is worrying you. So you already know, you have that pressure of that one important thing, but you already know that because of that, other things are not receiving your attention. So, and just knowing that in the pit of your stomach,
Yeah.
you're already going to sacrifice something.
Yeah, you're already at that point of trade-offs, right?
Right.
It's such a good point and because worry is one of those terms that has the same spectrum. That if we worry about things, then we can that could keep our mind focused on it, or keep us from just being nonchalant about it. But then worry gets to a point where it's the rehearsal for failure, because why we're worrying, we are actually pre-rehearsing the whole idea of how it's going to go wrong. And then that's usually not the best use of our mind. So here's the thing about the mind. One of the things that I'm going to describe is that that makes it so amazing is that it's transformable. It can change, and not just by changing perspective, but it can change over time, the way we have our hardwiring, but the way we write in the software programs in our mind, and it really can change neural pathways and neuroplasticity, neurogenesis. So there are ways that we can control things on the short term, but then also continue to build habits that will be expressed in new neural pathways. And so some things that are not so easy and natural, and we think if we have enough awareness to try them and to do them repeatedly, they become the new natural. And so another thing that's amazing about the mind is that it can watch itself. So this is the second the second bullet here, or column, or Roman numeral number 2 is mindfulness, the internal watchtower. And so when these things are going on, I have written under here, there is a big difference between automatically identifying with our thoughts and feelings and knowing how to watch them with some level of impartiality. And so, but just by feeling the stress doesn't have to be the same as I'm stressed. It's like you're watching yourself with this observer, this watchtower, that it's a deeper part of you, or it's more of an overview. And it's very possible. It's a habit, but you're watching yourself like you're watching the weather. And it's out there. This time of year, this time of day, a lot of times we're looking at some of these clouds and thinking, what's up with that? Is that something that, is that relevant to me? Is it going to rain? Is it going to be nice? What's going on with that? When we can do that when we are, I think, calm enough to allow ourselves that level of awareness to detect the shifts in ourselves, and be aware of it sooner rather than later, and then to just watch it. And you don't even have to take a for or against position in the very beginning. It's just watching it, knowing that somebody walks into a room and you have a bad history with that person, And if you were just watching, you might say, oh, I can feel the frustration arising. I can feel the anger arising. You're watching that. But that part of you that's saying, I can feel that, they don't have that. They don't really have that anger. They're watching it. So it's part of what's going on around them. But they're not ready to say yet, I am frustrated or I am angry. They're just saying, I have frustration or anger arising. So what that does is it gives you a choice. This impartiality gives you wisdom and choice where you're not in a corner. You're not like, now I'm mad. What do I do now? I'm just going to react to being mad. I'm going to react to being frustrated or react to being worried. And that's more of an automatic response. But if we can create a space between that which is arising, those emotions, those feelings, those reactions that are arising, and that part of us that's watching it. And there are a lot of ways to practice that when we're around, when there's not like big consequences, when we're in traffic, when we're in long lines, when we're around rude people. It's just interesting. Like, we want to pay attention to the traffic, right? Or we want to pay attention to the rude person. But it would be really interesting in those times to pay attention to what some of your automatic reactions are, and just play with it a little bit. Like, yeah, what's up with that? Do I want to react as I would if I weren't, contemplating this, if I weren't creating this psychological working space? Because it always comes down to what you do with what's going on, what you have, and you're always trying to make the choice that makes the greatest difference, right? What to do next, what to say next, what to refrain from doing next. And so the mindfulness, that habit of watching the changes that come over you, that is an amazing capability that the mind naturally has. We all have it. And sometimes we think we're too busy to deploy it, but that's usually when we really need it. Because the more we do that, it doesn't take a couple of minutes. We're talking about seconds where you're recognizing this shift in you. And so what is it we really should be watching is the third thing. And what we should be watching for, most generally, to make this a real simple task in terms of mindfulness, is are we under the influence of positive emotions or negative emotions? That's really simple. It's easy to remember. Are we under the influence of positive emotions or negative emotions? Now, the negative emotion, well, you know what? I wanted to ask this question in a breakout, but we'll spend too much time getting out and back. So, and you've already warmed up and you've been talking to each other, you're talking to me. So let me ask this to the entire group. I'm going to probably, I'm going to be somebody who's you'll figure out that I'm kind of against the negative emotions for the most part. I think they do have something to contribute to efficacy. But when you think of the positive emotions like optimism, hope, joy, appreciation, love, those kinds of things, they really animate the best of us, right? The best parts of us. We become better communicators. I think we become more creative thinkers. We're better collaborators. We have better energy. We feel better. So when you're under the influence of the negative emotions, one of the things that happens that is not so good is that we lose, and the more intense they are, we lose IQ points. We definitely are not as smart. And sometimes that's not so apparent to us. If you watch somebody else who's falling under the spell, it's easier to see. But nature oftentimes plays a cruel trick on us, where if we're really starting to lose it, we are actually confused, losing IQ points, we're losing perspective. But sometimes it really feels like clarity. And that's pretty cruel, because that's when we're ready to say, I know. Don't tell me now, I know, because you're upset. But what's really going on is that your mind is simplifying things, oversimplifying things. And 5,000 years ago, if there something was a threat that all of a sudden was in your space, that ability to just turn everything else off except focus on fight or flight, that was really an advantage, right? But there were many, many more things 5,000 years ago in our immediate space that could take us out like that, and many fewer things that were, opportunities like we have now. So the question I want you to answer is, when have you found negative emotions to be distinctly helpful to you, like anger, resentment, anxiety? When have you found that we do have them, right? From an evolutionary psychology standpoint, they passed a lot of tests. So when are negative emotions your ally? Yes. I'm sorry, I don't see your name.
Oh, Sophia.
Sophia.
Yeah. Well, I think negative emotions are kind of your body's alarm system. So they notify you that there's something you need to change about what you're doing. So if you're regularly feeling anxious, that's obviously not good. And that means you need to change something about your work style or management style or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sophia, because they are a reaction to what happened. They might be a reaction to what you anticipate is going to happen, what you're forecasting, right? But they certainly become a determinant to what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and then I guess a lot of people can kind of fall into that negative thinking by forecasting that something negative will happen in the future, which I think that's just kind of how I think people need to just train their minds to like not anticipate negative events, because that will never come of anything. Nothing good will come of it. So
not usually, and I think that we should think about this truism as well, that we are seldom, the mind is seldom creative or innovative, or you could even say opportunistic, about things where we take a cynical view of. Think about that. Like if we take a cynical view of some field or some challenge, it's really hard for the mind to work opportunistically, optimistically. So, and when you were saying that, so maybe somebody will start working on details, right? It's interesting in personality. I love to work with different personality types, but oftentimes when we're under a lot of stress, those people who are really intuitive, they will get flipped. Like we all get flipped, so that if we're really a detail person and we get flipped, we'll start reading between the lines. We'll see something, dark and looming, but because we're not good at it, but we start to get away from the details and the facts, or the sequential work that we like to do. Or if you're an intuitive person and you're really stressed, for some reason you'll start getting stuck on details. And oftentimes, like detailed people, they know the difference between a significant detail and one that's not. But if you're not really a detail person and you get stuck on a detail, it's probably something that you shouldn't be wasting a lot of time on. So that it changes our system sometimes before we even know it. So Sophia was saying it is an alarm. Other thoughts on the negative? Yes. Sorry.
Jim Sikowski.
Jim. Yeah.
I was the one on the Myers-Briggs. I'm a NT, intuitive thinking person, but I'm the one that when I'd stress, I would go ahead and start to think logically. I would try to put it into a box and sort of an attack. But to answer your question, I'm purely optimistic when it comes to my subordinates, and I always have been. And I've made the transition from the military to civilian life, and it's been a while. But I purely believe in people, and my negative feelings come in when I let go and I say they're not doing, or I have to let somebody go. And I'll say that's a time when I'm like, okay, I have to go ahead, and that the positivity is not working. What I feel, what others are feeling, it's not good. And I give way to that negativity, but then it's a transition to say, okay, how do I handle this? and again, kind of bring it logically. But that's a time when negative feelings, when I'm saying, what's the reality here? I don't feel good about this. The behavior and what I'm getting back from their behavior with the cohort it's not good. That's a time when I see the negative.
Yeah, and once it becomes thematic to the situation, that's the way you're going to. That's the story you're going to tell yourself, right? So it can be very limiting. Good example. Thank you. Others?
You can't see me, so is it okay if I go?
Sure.
Okay. So I think one example that I have is if, for instance, I take a test and I didn't get the score that I was aspiring to, it's a negative emotions of, oh, I failed myself, right? That actually presents itself as a challenge to me, and I love and I excel on challenges. So for me, negative emotions a lot of the time actually, they make me think outside the box or bigger to how I can do things better the next time, to turn things upside down, as opposed to dwell in my sorrow and anything else that's negative that's associated with a not so positive experience. So it's an accelerator.
Yeah, that's really what we're after. We're trying to use because feelings are real. So the negative feelings, I'm not saying that they're not they shouldn't be recognized for the reality that they bring. But one of the problems is when we think we know why we're having the negative emotion, we're almost always wrong. Like the first thing we think it is, it's always too simple, too protective, self-protective. So, but the negative feeling does tell you that something is wrong, and so it's like a check engine light, and so the check engine light doesn't get real specific sometimes, but it tells you that you probably should go to a garage where somebody can diagnose the problem, but that you do have a problem.
Right. Isn't that the difference between when the negative emotion sucks you into it as opposed to you realizing it and then work your way to get over it and go forward and use it for something that can lift you up? And again, ties into personality probably.
And the more we know about our personality, the more we know our trends.
Right.
The way that we take things, and then we have a story to tell ourselves usually, and they're not random. They're usually a pattern. And when we get sucked in, as you said, that's when we start to identify with it. So to go back to the example of somebody coming into a room and then you start to feel negative, right? You start to feel resentful. But if you're looking at it from a distance with impartiality, there is this duality where, like, you do have a negative emotion at the surface, where your mind is engaging with the environment, but not down deep where you're making decisions. And so you're not. You could say that I feel the resentment, but I am not resentful until I identify with it. Like, I am not angry until I identify with it. And once you identify with it, then you're going to go off into all the scenarios of anger or resentment or discouragement. And in basketball, one of the things that we would teach the kids, work on every day, all the time, is that we're talking about pressure, high pressure coming at you fast. It's complicated. There's winning and losing. We're trying to communicate and do it together. And so it's always this balancing act. Like, if we start to fall apart and start to feel pressure, stress, how do we not distress even more, but de-stress, bring it back and put the stress on our opposition. They're trying to put it on us. And so we're trying to convert their stress into our performance. And we're trying to take their performance and break it down to make it stress for them. So we're always talking about any situation that you could predict that will come up that starts to break you down. You've got an antidote all ready for it. And so in your work life, in your personal life, where these are the things that push my button, and you know what they are, and you also have to be converted to the idea that the negative emotion taken too far is not working toward your best interest. As I said, that's hard to do. When I used to be in more counseling situations, I can't tell you how many times people would just want to hold on to whatever the negative feeling was, and they might want to say, "Dr. Brennan, let me tell you what he did or what she said," and you would agree with me. I have every right to be angry or resentful, and without being condescending, my aim was to get around to the point where I would say, it's almost like you're saying, I have every right to be impaired in this situation. I have every right to suffer from this, or I deserve to lose IQ points. I deserve to be lower functioning. And it's like, if I were a medical doctor, they wouldn't come in and say, "Dr. Brennan, can you give me a note to say that I deserve to have lower back pain, right? Or a migraine, right? Or high blood pressure." And when you look at it that way, you'd say, "Hell no, that's not why I'm here. I'm trying to get rid of it." And so when we look at our patterns, but then you have some people that would say, "Look, this is the way I do things, and I'm not going to change." And so don't try to talk me into changing this part of me. There's a very non-judgmental question that we should ask ourselves, all of us. We all have these points where we get stuck. But the question that I would ask them is, okay, so do you feel like you are getting more of what you do want in this situation with these responses and less of what you don't want? Or is it working the other way around? I can't say yes or no. You have to be the one to say yes or no, because if you're saying, "No, I'm not getting more of what I do, I'm getting less of what I do want, I keep getting more of what I don't," then I would say, okay, let's talk about what the root causes of this upside downness is, and maybe you come up with a different challenge. But it starts with mindfulness, and then it gets to the point where you catch yourself early. You take that signal for what it is. It's some intel telling you that I was high functioning a minute ago. I was the right person and making the right moves, and suddenly I'm not so high functioning. I'm in a lower state of adaptation, and my feelings sometimes they're the first to sense it, and they're telling me something needs to be more deeply understood. Something needs to be addressed. Something needs to be let go. But the fallacy usually is that we think I'm under the influence of the negative emotions. It's because of external conditions. My internal reaction is not a problem here.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Don't you think it's associated with low self-esteem, because they put it on other people, but they can do something about it? So if they opt out of doing something about it, that's because deeper in they don't believe they have the ability, the skills, or the knowledge to go ahead and find something better, whether it be a better job, a better partner. It can be different things. It's always, if you want to linger on the sorrow and the depression, and I'm putting all the medical, symptoms aside, like depression and things that actually needs to be balanced chemically, then it's really a disbelief in oneself about doing something better to promote themselves. That's when you blame it on others and you become even sadder.
Yeah, there definitely is a lot of that, because if we feel like we have a path to success, then we will take that, and if we will hang in there longer, right? But if we feel like we're starting to lose in the struggle, then we're going to have to protect ourselves with a story that doesn't look so bad to us. One of the disadvantages that we have in our mind is that the brain is mostly designed to take care of the organism it occupies. So whenever we have these blind spots, it's usually about self-enhancement or self-protection. But I want to go on to the next one, because this is feeling and meta-feeling, because this is one of the ways where I said the brain is transformable, right? The brain can watch itself, the mind can watch itself. But another powerful ability of the brain is to build its own perspective. And so what we're trying to do in any situation is to capture that momentum again, is to build a perspective of what are the opportunities here. And every set of circumstances, even if they're negative, if it's coming at us and we're on a streak where there are 3 or 4 things in a row that we weren't looking for, we're hoping we didn't get, we get. It doesn't change the fact that whatever those circumstances are, they have an optimal potential. And so when we start to come around again, like, okay, I'm not going to be hijacked long-term by the negative emotions. I want to get my clarity back. Something was bringing its own penalties. Something is coming that is definitely setting me back. But this is a time where I need all the clarity I can get. So I want to convert out of the negative emotions, knowing that something needs to be addressed, something needs to be diagnosed or further understood. Now I need to go back to the positive emotions. Now I need to have a more opportunistic perspective. I don't want to fool my mind. I don't want to tell fairy tales to my mind, but I want to know what the optimal potential of this situation really is. You're stuck in traffic. You can't go any faster, right? You're stuck. And so plan A, whatever plan A is blown up. But what's the next best thing that you can do with that time? What's the next best thing that you can do with your mind? And that's where we've become more creative, more innovative. And even if we're in a situation where we need to communicate with others, that if we're excited about still optimizing the potentials that are left to us, then that gives the mind something really purposeful and positive to do. And so it's hard to let go of what we thought we were going to be doing, right? But the meta feeling means, how do you feel about the feeling? And I don't want to get like too like the crazy psychologist, like this isn't really everyday stuff. It really is. How do you feel about the feeling you're having? I'm frustrated. And I've got this has to happen. I need to get this done. I have this expectation of me. And so I'm worried. But when you do the meta feeling, you're separating again. You're saying, what is my relationship with that worry? What is my relationship with that feeling? And a lot of times I think it's best just to start with curiosity. Like, wow, I'm really stressed now. Like, Jim, what's up with that? You know, it's like you're looking at somebody else. It really is a great antidote. It's a great place to start at a platform now where you're being impartial, you're not hijacked, you're being objective, you are not playing tricks on your mind, you're retrieving your clarity, you're making new assessments, and then you're saying, what is the wisest thing to do next? Two examples. One is, this is a Buddhist metaphor. It's called the 2 arrows. Maybe some of you have heard of it. Anybody heard of the 2 arrows? It's very easy to remember. So when you're in a high pressure situation, right, you're never going to get it perfectly right. Just by its nature, we're going to have to learn as we go, which means learning from experience means we're learning from what worked, but we're also learning from what didn't, and hopefully we're learning even faster from what didn't. And so that's part of resilience. It's part of wisdom. And so the first arrow represents a setback or something negative that just happened. Okay, so you got shot at and hit. And so the first arrows are they're predictable. You know, they're sort of inevitable, but oftentimes they come as a surprise. And so the first arrow is already sticking out of you, and there's going to be some reaction to it, certainly a negative reaction to it. But it's the second arrow that it does more damage. And the second arrow, it represents our negative internal reaction to the first arrow. All right. So we didn't want the first arrow, but it's already there. So it's in the present moment. Now it's one of the conditions that we have to try to optimize. And the second arrow is by this theory, usually has more negative influence on what eventuates than the first arrow. The reasons why the second arrow is more unfortunate is because it was a choice. Like the first arrow, it could have been foreseeable and we didn't see it, but by the time it's sticking out of you, it's not a choice anymore. The second one was an option. Okay, so that second one really didn't have to hit you. Another thing that's unfortunate is that you shot it. Nobody else shot it. Somebody else shot the first one, right? Life shot the first one. You shot the second one. And sometimes we shoot it over and over again. Does it take you 5 minutes to get over this first arrow? Does it take you a day? Does it take you 5 years? Because you keep going back to it. We all know what that's like in life, right? There's some arrows that we don't want to get over. We want to shoot second arrows in response to it. And the people who and us, when we're doing well, they would tell you stories, and I would hear your stories about the things you're proud of, and those stories would contain first arrows and setbacks. And part of the reason why you would be proud of the achievements is that, yeah, there were first arrows. This was hard. This was difficult. But your story would have some way of claiming, which would probably be true, that you're proud of this and you succeeded because of the first arrows, not despite the first arrows. It became a much greater achievement because the level of difficulty, right? The level of setback and what you suffered for. And so because you were converting first arrows into wins rather than using that same time and energy to shoot second arrows. And usually if you're shooting second arrows, you're not creating wins. You can be creating excuses, lots of good excuses, but you're not going to be creating wins. And any thoughts, reactions to that? One of the things that we would do, and I'll close with this, but at Villanova, one of the last things that our coach would say to the players before we would leave the locker room is, don't wish for this to be easy. There were times too when we were heavy favorites over another team. And in the last 10 years of my time there, we were really good and actually won 2 national championships. But so there were a lot of games where it was like, we're going to go kick their butt. We're going to go blow them out. It didn't always happen that way, but he would say, don't even want for that. Like, we want to get better. We want to be challenged. So don't wish for this to be easy. And so even if the other team is not putting up a good battle, we are going to put up the best battle we can because we're here to get better. And the only way to get better is to make this hard. And during the game, whenever there was, and so a lot of things are going to happen since it's not going to be a perfect 40 minutes. So over that period of time, you're going to get bad calls. You're going to make bad plays. Your opponents are going to make great plays and make you look bad. Coach is going to get mad at you. There's so many ups and downs. So whenever something negative happens, the way the team would respond is to clap their hands, look at each other and smile and say, next play, attitude. And so what they were saying is, and so this wasn't just, okay, like, let's just bounce back. It was way deeper than that because we talked about it every single day in practice when they used to be going through the stress immunity training, right? What that means is that play that maybe you threw the ball away or you lapsed in focus and somebody made a play over you, that play was the most important play when it was going on. And so that play's done. And the next play is now the most important play. And so what happens to a team when they start to lose the momentum, maybe they have good momentum and now 4 or 5 things in a row happen, they're getting worse and the coach has to call timeout. So because they've lost their momentum and the other team has gained the positive momentum, what's happening is the next time down the floor after a bad play, they still haven't gotten over the last one. the next one is suboptimal, right? And then the next one after that is suboptimal. So it starts to spiral downward. But when we would say next play, even people on the bench, coaches, myself, I'd be behind the bench. It's like smiling, like that play sucked. We know it did. Like we're not kidding ourselves. Next play, and that one's over, and we're only taking with us as we travel back down the floor the part that's constructive, the what we learned. Like we may have been fooled on something, but we just got smarter. But we did more than get smarter. We got more positive because now we're reminding ourselves that we can't. The next play is the most important play, and we're looking at each other, smiling, so that nobody's saying, "Why did you throw the ball away? Well, this was your mistake. That was the referee's mistake." There was no excuses. We just want to know, like, what happened? Here we go. We're more together. We're more fired up. We're more focused, and we're also smarter because we just learned something, right? And the truth is that we can't wait for the next play. We can't wait for it, and that the next play will actually be better than it might have been because the last one was a disaster, right? Or it was a mistake. And so when you think about that, when that's your habit, so we got to do these things. We got to build habits. There's not like a magic wand, but we have to understand that these are levers that give us the automatic reactions that either give us greater adaptive power or they give us less adaptive power. And so when we think about a game where let's just say all other things were equal, but if this happened, we had 30 first arrows and the other team had 30 first arrows, and every time we were just marginally better at converting those, into all of the positive things, and better than the other team, then I would think I'd like our chances. Iteration after iteration, you're just going to start to see a separation. And the more you start to see it in the results, you're saying, hey, I don't have to commit this to memory. This stuff works. This is what I'm going to do this next time and next time. So my suggestion for you, just in terms of practicing this meta feeling and the mindfulness and converting back and forth, is to pay attention to it when you're in those situations. Life gives us these situations every day that kind of prompt the stress response in us. They're not really big deals, but yeah, like traffic, like long lines, rude people. I had to go to the doctor's office today, and in the lobby of this medical building, and there's a fellow in the lobby talking on the phone, doesn't have a mask. He's got it in his pocket. And so I think he's in a medical building now. He should be putting a mask on. And then the elevator door opens and in he goes, still talking on the phone. And I'm standing at the door and he looks at me like, are you getting in or what? And I look at him like, how about the mask? And he just let the door close and he went up. And so I was like, are you freaking kidding me? And then I just started laughing like, hey, that's first. That's just the first hour. I'll take the next elevator, right? I mean, he's got some awareness to work out there, but I didn't want to. I want to go down the floor to the next play and actually be more aware of my own mask and make sure I'm not doing that. And so it was a perfect time to reinforce the habit of using mindfulness to keep myself from getting hijacked. Because I'd have a good story to tell if I were to tell you, I was upset with that. I still am not over it. People being so insensitive. Like that's not going to help me. That's not really going to help anybody. So, that's my story, I guess. Is these are the things that we can do, but we've got to be committed to practicing them and really believing that converting out of the negative and just letting the negative tell you something's going on and you should pay attention to. But if you really want to excel, then you want to be building the perspective that really calls on the positive emotions and the optimal scenarios. There's a group that I work with in Silicon Valley that is run by a billionaire, and it's like Special Forces of Rapid Humanitarian Response. And so we've got super people from around the world, and we never use that. We would never say challenge without we say challenge opportunity. We would never say setback. without setback comeback. This is a setback comeback situation. This is a challenge opportunity situation, and we're not making it up. We're just pointing it out, and it's a great habit. And any thoughts as we close?
I just wanted to offer one more, is that in war, it's fear, and it's like a bottomless pit. So with the people you worked, or you just had to not address it, but it was there. It was okay. You had to realize what that was, but that was something that it led to nowhere. It would freeze you. It would just, it's a crazy, endless emotion. And you just had to kind of, it's cold and hard and dark and wet. Oh my, and you'd move on. That's what we used to say. It's cold and hard and dark and wet. But that's what I was going to say. Fear would stymie, it freeze you, but you'd have to look at, and as a leader, you'd have to look at the subordinates or other people and give them their due and recognize it, but at the same time is try to refocus to do something productive.
Jim, I love the framing. I love this expression, road to nowhere. And I like to use that sometimes and say, this is the road that I deserve to take this. This is the road I want to take. And then you say, this is the road to nowhere. This is just like the guy in the elevator. I could just say, find him and give him a lecture. It's like road to nowhere.
It consumes you.
There's a saying in this is like Buddhist psychology too, that there are things that hurt us, that there's pain and suffering that get us somewhere, and there's pain and suffering that get us nowhere. And so knowing the difference through our own experiences in life, and then paying attention to what those roads are, that's wisdom. Thank you. All right. Any last questions or?
Hello, Professor Brennan. Just a
Yes.
quick question for you. Just kind of considering from my own personal experiences, I've just noticed that yes, there's a meta feeling and a way an awareness that you can kind of call upon to really sense yourself and be mindful of where you're at. But there's other times where I've noticed where just because of the scale of the issue, or just because of the intensity or the speed of it, sometimes you hit that negative spiral and you just you lose it. There's no controlling it. There's just your body reacts and it's out of your hands. How would you say that you kind of come back from that kind of spiral spot and kind of give yourself a way to breathe and return back to?
Yeah, it's hard to come back when you lose it with that level of intensity. Breathing, first of all, you have to want to come back, right? Oftentimes we don't when they're in the throes of it. But and breathing is the most central thing we can do to slow everything else down. But then when you're looking back on it, when people double down and say, well, I had every right to lose it, and so oftentimes we lose it because of ego, and then we double down on it because of pride, rather than look back and say, all right, let me break that down. What was going on, the last thing before I lost it? What was the last thing the last step that I took that was rational and helpful? And then what happened? And then if I were to do that over again, what would I do differently? And oftentimes we don't want to do that kind of thing because we want to say we had a right to do it, right? But if we forego that, and then we say, what would I have done differently before I went into the blind spot? Then and we think about that a lot, and that's not rumination. That's really purposeful, right? To go over it again, and that kind of regret is a good thing, because we are rehearsing our mind for that kind of inflection point again. And this time, that next step won't be into the blindness. That next step would be one that we already worked out was a higher functioning example of higher adaptive power. And then we may go into a blind spot again, but it's going to be further down the road. And we expand those boundaries of what we can see and how we can operate.
Okay, thank you.
Good question, thank you.
Can I ask you a question? It's a very short one.
Sure.
So you're giving courses about psychology to MBA students. I'm not sure if I caught that.
It's in the one MBA program, and it's
Yeah.
yeah. So organizational behavior, and in organizational behavior, we look at 3 different dimensions throughout the semester, and one is the individual psychology, like what makes each one of us tick, and then we go to another level of analysis is group psychology. So now we're okay. I feel like I can find equilibrium, and I start dealing, and people deal back, and now it's getting difficult again, right? So how do things change when we are putting people in teams, or when we're looking to collaborate? And when you put people in teams, you're expecting, the reason you're going through the trouble of making a team or a group is that they will rise above the sum of their parts. Otherwise, don't even bother, right? So hopefully the work itself is interdependent, or you wouldn't need to go through the trouble, but you're expecting everyone to actually come away with something that's greater than they could have done on their own. And so that's tricky, but it's worth it. And the last dimension is the organizational structures and the culture, right? The way leadership and communication work, and those things, because all 3 of those dimensions they determine behavior. So we want to know that, how do they work? How do we work them intentionally so that they're in alignment and they're producing the kind of behavior that's consistent with what we're looking for, what we're in the business to do, and that helps with motivation, retention, job satisfaction, productivity, all of those things. So even though we're working our way up the ladder, we're still circle back always to that emotional intelligence, that each one of your workers, each one of your employees, they're the basic unit of what you want that team to be. They're the basic unit of what you want the organization to be. If you want them to be tough, if you want them to be resilient, wise, creative, it's got to come out of them, because those are human qualities, right? You don't really design that into somebody, but you make designs that influence those things emerging from the person. At Villanova, we used to talk about with the coaching staff, how do we get a team to buy in so much? Like the old school was, you just crack under under the crack of the whip of the coach. You conform, and that's not the way the game is played anymore. It's too creative, and so it's like, how do we get them to conform to the basics, the fundamentals, but then perform beyond obedience, beyond beyond conformance,
Appreciation.
And that's the key. And that's the key in 21st century management, I think, is how do you get your group to perform beyond just mere conformance to policies and procedures.
Professor Brennan, I wanted to say that I think this is this kind of theory, or what we talked about, also lends itself to ethical decision making and maybe shared values, like the understanding of like values and diversity is that, we might experience negative emotions in a diverse environment, and how do we, allow that so we don't destroy the values of a group, so we can perform at a higher level. But this is ethical decision-making leadership.
Yeah. I mean, that's a road that goes somewhere, Jim. It's a long road. We won't take that road. That's a road that goes somewhere. And the idea of diversity, do individuals see it as threat or opportunity, right? And so that's going to make a difference in how they approach it. And the idea of good ethical behavior, when all of the research shows that the lack of good ethical behavior really forecasts a short sustainability, even if you're rocking it as a business, right? If you're not operating ethically, you're not going to be around long. And that's actually that's shorter and shorter now in the days of mass media. So, but those are things really that still come back to, do you have employees with the want to give what you're going to really need to have a competitive advantage? And if you're the manager, if you're the director, what are the things you put into place that evoke those things, the want to? It's hard to replace that. Okay, I know I'm running into to Professor Savino's time. I appreciate your patience, Steve, but I really enjoyed spending time with you, and I hope you have a good impression of Lehigh, what kinds of things we try to cook up in the classroom with your help. And I hope our paths cross again.